Hello, everybody. My name is Michael, and welcome back to Last to First. Well, the 2024 season is finally upon us. And like my joke there, it is basically part two of 2023. But regardless, it's exciting to have Formula One back. I am ready for the season ahead. It's going to be a super long season, 24 races. And yeah, it's hard to believe that we're going to have Red Bull dominance for 24 races for the longest season ever. But nonetheless, there are plenty of good things happening behind Verstappen and the rest of the field. So let's get into things. So, like I mentioned, Verstappen and Red Bull picked up right where they left off in 2023, and might be worse than ever, to be honest, because there was a 22-second advantage over Sergio Perez, which is insane for teammates. And last year it was 12 seconds, and then an even bigger gap behind the Red Bulls. So absolutely insane to consider that. But Perez in behind was super close, so I guess that gives us some hope for the future. But really, it's less of Red Bull dominance and more Verstappen dominance, which was the case last year, but it looks to be ever more apparent because Verstappen was just on another level. And I think second place in the championship is really going to be up for grabs if Perez keeps having some not so good qualifyings like I anticipate him having throughout the year. But that battle for first, I think, is going to be pretty unlikely, as sad as it is. Not to be too doom and gloom after the first race of the season, but I suppose we have to be realistic. To be fair, though, it's not at all common for there to be really intense title fights. I mean, even going back to 2017, 2018, 2022, all the title fights kind of fizzled out after halfway through. 2021 was really an outlier and something that we may not see again for quite some time. So not something that always happens in Formula One. This is just part of the normal cycle of Formula One where one team gets things right and yeah, there's dominance for a while. So we just got to power through and hope the other teams can take a bigger step. But yeah, this year's Red Bull just seemed to really move the goalposts. When it was unveiled with some of the big changes that they made, I think people were thinking that maybe they would trip up. I didn't anticipate that happening. They're too educated on these regulations to really mess up. But they just seem to really revolutionize the car and just take it an even another step forward, which is hard to believe. Not showing any signs of any type of ceiling in these regulations yet. But yeah, it just goes to show how well Red Bull understands their car and understands the set of regulations. Everything they throw on the car seems to work, and then it just works well. They do have to kind of work their way throughout the weekend. They're not necessarily extracting the most performance out of it immediately, but by the time the race comes in qualifying, they're right there and they are ready to dominate. Even though, I think most people anticipated this result, and I did too, it's definitely tough to stomach that I think we're going to see a lot of this for the remainder of the season. But luckily, there will be great battles behind with the other 19 drivers fighting for really every single scrap of points that there are. It's so tight for the other 19 drivers, and there will be lots of things to look out for and lots of exciting battles ahead. The race itself wasn't so good, unfortunately. There wasn't much overtaking or much strategy. Everybody literally started on the same tire, moved to the same tire for the second stint, and there was some change in the third stint, but not enough to disrupt anything or create that much change, which is pretty unfortunate. I've said it before, and I'll be happy to say it again. I'm not overly pleased with these ground effect cars in this new era. I think they worked for about a half a season in 2022, and ever since then, they have just not been good enough. Even though the pack or the field is closer than ever, the cars are just they just can't overtake. I mean, they're very clumsy, they're overweight, they're big. DRS is not nearly as effective as it used to be. So people are just getting stuck in DRS trains, and it's really disappointing to see. And the fact that the FIA isn't doing anything to kind of crawl back some of the problems that development has arisen is pretty unfortunate, because these cars were meant to be better overtaking, and I feel like 2020, 2021, they were able to overtake a lot better, and particularly in 2022 as well. So it's unfortunate. I'm surprised they're not doing anything. I don't necessarily want to see something peg Red Bull back in particular, but just in general, they need to do something to get these cars under control, because it's just not working as anticipated. Now, there was some fun drama at the end of the race with the RB pair having a bit of a civil war, and that created some fun on on Twitter and all the social media. Yeah, one race into the new season, and the RB pair are already having beef. Yuki doing Yuki things. He was angry about team orders. So at the end of the race, he decided to dive bomb Ricardo on the cool down lap. So that's cool. And he ended up locking up, which I thought was just ironic and funny. Even on the cool down lap, Yuki can't control himself. And then after he locked up and went past Ricardo, he came back and flew right past him again and almost hit him, because he decided to move over into Ricardo. And yeah, just showing why Yuki is who Yuki is. That's just who he is. He's always been like this. He's been a hothead who doesn't have enough pace to back up his hotheadedness, and I'm not sure why everybody is surprised, to be honest. This is just what Yuki does. It'll be really important for the RB team principal, Lauren Mekies, to get a handle on this quick. They don't need a civil war at the beginning of the season, so it'll be important for him to really get things straight and make sure that the two aren't going to be crashing into each other for the rest of the season here. I think this just goes to show one of the many reasons why Red Bull just doesn't have any faith in Yuki to promote him to the main team. I mean, like, imagine if Yuki did that to Verstappen. Like, that would certainly never fly. Like, Yuki would be automatically demoted if that ever happened. So, yeah, Yuki's not making his life any easier, not showing why another team should pick him up or why he should be renewed again for next year. But if this keeps up, who knows? Red Bull might mess around and throw Lawson back into the mix in place of Tsunoda. You never know. Crazier things have happened. Now, one of the more interesting parts of the race was actually Carlos Sainz. I mean, he was driving pretty spicy, which was fun to see. He was really making the most interesting moves throughout the race. He passed Leclerc twice in moves that were definitely not team orders. They were tight and close and really fun to see. He really had the upper hand all race, even though he was behind in qualifying. And Sainz just looked comfortable and confident, and he really liked the car that was underneath him, and he really deserved that podium. He had a really great race. I mean, Sainz must be really angry and hurt that Ferrari decided to get rid of him, even though I feel like he's done a pretty good job for the past couple of years, and he's really like the perfect 1.5 driver for Ferrari. I mean, he's quicker than most number 2 drivers, like a Bottas and a Perez, but he's not always quick enough to challenge Leclerc. So, like, in a real title fight, like, he's probably not going to be there enough for the whole fight, but he'd be able to back up Leclerc enough. So I don't see it still doesn't make any sense. Obviously, Hamilton is one of the best ever, so, like, you can't go wrong having him in the car. But I feel like just for the long-term future, like, Sainz still has more years ahead of him. He's been doing a good job. It's not a tumultuous relationship. Like, Hamilton and Leclerc is more likely to bubble up with 2 alpha drivers than Sainz and Leclerc. So I'm not sure, but Sainz definitely is going to try to make his mark. He really wants to prepare himself or show off to the rest of the teams that he deserves another good seat, and I think he's gonna do his best to have a really strong start to the beginning of the season so that he can get a good drive for 2025. I know Leclerc was struggling with some brake issues, which certainly led to him not being as competitive, but I don't think his tire wear was that impressive. He was quickly running out of the rear tires, which isn't necessarily affected by the front locking that he was having. Obviously, the front locking was causing bad tire wear on the fronts there, but he just seemed to be very squirrely and all over the place. And yeah, just overall the tire wear didn't look too impressive. Overall, the Ferraris just kind of seemed pretty squirrely and on edge. They didn't seem too planted. I feel like every time we were going to a live feed of them, they were kind of really wrestling with the steering wheel and trying to force their way into it. So we'll see how that plays out throughout the rest of the season. But Leclerc's struggles today really remind me of Spain 2023. I feel like there may have been some other instances as well. But Leclerc was just nowhere in Spain, and he blamed it on the car, and they ended up finding not a single thing wrong with the car. So I don't know. Maybe that's a similar case. Maybe it's not. I haven't heard if they did find actual braking issues after the Bahrain Grand Prix or not. But maybe it was just one of those off days with Leclerc where he was just nowhere and just couldn't figure out where he was and couldn't get a handle on things. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, the hope of the season is that all of the drivers, bar Verstappen, are so close. It's actually pretty crazy how close it is, particularly in qualifying. The entire field spread was just over 1 second, which is insane for 20 drivers, 10 different teams. It just goes to show that just one single little mistake in qualifying can kind of make or break your day and make or break your race, because you see if you're off by a tenth of a second, even half a tenth of a second, you might lose 2, 3, 4 positions in qualifying, which is really insane to think about. So it'll be awesome to see throughout the year how close this qualifying is, how the order is really going to get jumbled up, I feel, every race, because just the difference of having that one slightly better lap at the right time and just sticking it all together at the right time can really make or break things, because just even 1/10 of a second is going to separate you from maybe even pole or from second, third, fourth. It's so tight behind. It's actually insane. Yeah, I think that closeness, though, is also having a problem during the race because the cars could barely overtake. Not only just because of the things I mentioned with these ground effect cars, but with everybody being so closely matched, it's tough to find an advantage or it's tough to find a good enough advantage to be able to pass. Cars typically need, a decent chunk of advantage to be able to pass, and when they're this tightly matched and DRS is not having that big of an impact, then it's going to be pretty tricky to pass. So hopefully we'll see in some of the coming races that the cars are able to pass a bit better. When there was a pace advantage, they certainly were able to get by, like Sainz on Leclerc and Perez on a few drivers and stuff like that. So it's certainly possible, but overall it just seemed like everybody was getting stuck in DRS trains, which is no good. Even like we saw, Russell was ahead of Leclerc, Sainz, and Perez at the beginning of the race for quite some time, and he had no DRS. But even in the Mercedes, which is still one of the slowest cars in a straight line, he was able to stay ahead of all those drivers who all had DRS, which is kind of surprising. So that just goes to show how not so strong the DRS is now. Yeah, either way, super close. Bit of a pecking order that I wanted to talk about too here. Red Bull obviously are clearly number one. Ferrari looked to be second, but it's kind of tough to say. They're definitely far off Red Bull, but not too far away from like the Mercedes and McLaren's behind. It seems like it could go either way with Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren. They're just so tightly matched that whoever's strings it all together on the right weekend might be the ones ahead. But overall, it does seem like Ferrari has a bit of a pace advantage, probably with Mercedes kind of right there with Ferrari or a little behind, and then probably McLaren a bit behind Mercedes there. Either way, super close. I think Mercedes is still kind of a dark horse. Like, they had obviously good qualifying pace, and then before Russell was having the power unit struggles, he seemed to be pretty quick and kind of keeping up with the Ferrari. So I feel like we still don't really know the true pace of that Mercedes as they're kind of figuring out their new concept. But behind McLaren, it seems like Aston is kind of in their own world. They're kind of on the outer reaches of points, but still have a good qualifying car since Alonso did get it up there, I think, in the sixth, which was pretty good. And then behind that, it just continues to be super tight. It looks like kind of like Haas, RB, and Williams all seem to be right there. Maybe Williams and Haas a little more. The Haas is surprisingly quick. They weren't really able to show, I think, everything, all of their pace this weekend, but they're definitely going to be a dark horse back there, surprisingly. And Williams overall seems to look pretty impressive. I was pretty disappointed with RB. They didn't seem to quite have the pace that I think most people were anticipating with the RB 2.0 tag, or pink Mercedes that some people want to call them that, even though they're not at all that. They certainly have some Red Bull elements and more Red Bull parts, but they're definitely not a pink Mercedes situation, and clearly not with the pace that they were showing. But yeah, then it seems to be Sauber and Alpine at the back end of things. And boy, Alpine continues to have their struggles with some more people departing and resigning. So not looking good for Alpine. Who knows? Maybe Andretti will come in and buy up Alpine. I would like to see that. It'd be fun. Now, on top of the field being so close, there wasn't a single DNF throughout the race, which is actually insane. And even under normal circumstances, that's pretty impressive, but particularly for the first race of the season, for there not to be a single crash or, a single crash that led to a DNF or any type of reliability problems is really insane. I mean, it's crazy to think about how reliable these cars are nowadays, even though there were some struggles for some of the teams in preseason testing with some reliability concerns. They all seemed to get on top of it enough to where they didn't have any type of struggles. I wonder, I don't know the stats behind this, but I wonder if there ever has been a time maybe, or when was the last time that the opening race of the season didn't have a single DNF, because that's pretty insane to think about. So let's take a look at my beautiful predictions that I made before the start of the race weekend. And I don't know, I feel like for my quali and race predictions, I wasn't too far off. But I certainly was wrong. So my qualifying predictions, I had Leclerc on pole, Verstappen second, Sainz third, Russell fourth, and Hamilton fifth. And the actual results were Verstappen and Leclerc seconds, which those two are always kind of interchangeable in qualifying, so I think that's a pretty good win for me. Russell ended up getting third, Sainz fourth, so once again just kind of flip-flop there, and then Perez wound up fifth, and Hamilton was nowhere to be found. Like, I thought he would be a bit better, but he was in ninth, I think he was. Now for the race, I had predicted a Verstappen win, followed by Leclerc, Perez, Sainz, and Hamilton, and of course I was right about Verstappen winning that. Perez actually wound up with a nice second place, which was good for him. 1-2 for Red Bull, pretty impressive. Followed by a podium for Sainz, who I thought that Leclerc would be the one bringing home a podium. So a really good race for Sainz. And then Leclerc to bring up fourth, and Russell wound up being the stronger of the Mercedes pair and wound up in fifth. So Russell having a strong start to the season, which is something that he really needs. He also out-qualified Hamilton, but that's something that he really needs so that he can really Russell this team away from Hamilton, since Hamilton is going to be leaving. I'm sure Russell wants to make this team his own, particularly if Kimi Antonelli comes into the team next year, being the prospect that he is. Russell will really want to keep the team in his control. But we'll see. The first F2 race weekend, Kimi Antonelli didn't seem to do too well. I wasn't able to watch it all, but I didn't hear too many impressive things from him. But from the sounds of it, from previous categories that he's been, normally takes him a couple races to kind of get warmed up into the series and get going. So I expect we'll see him do a bit better in the coming races. So for my bold prediction of the weekend, I feel like it was pretty bold. I thought there would be a McLaren double DNF, and, well, yeah, definitely did not happen. There was not a single DNF throughout the field, and McLaren seemed to have no reliability concerns and had decent pace overall. So that's kind of surprising, since I thought they would have some type of issues since they were having issues in preseason testing. But Mercedes really ended up being the ones that were the most worrisome because of the power unit that was overheating. So that's definitely a concern, particularly because the race was actually kind of cool for normal Bahrain standards. So when they go to Saudi next weekend, it's probably going to be even warmer, which will probably lead to Mercedes having to open up some more cooling vents, which will in turn make them a bit slower because it'll be a bit less aerodynamically efficient. So we'll see how that all plays out next weekend. For my masterclass of the weekend, I had RB, and they were definitely not a masterclass. They, in fact, have started a civil war, and they looked much slower than anticipated. They had their drivers at each other's throats, not interested in each other. Ricardo is just kind of like, I think he's just kind of like dumbfounded by it. He's like, what is wrong with Yuki Tsunoda? And then Yuki is just being his normal hot-headed self. So maybe that'll provide some entertainment throughout the season, which would be fun. But overall, yeah, RB's strategy wasn't the best and just wasn't a super strong season opener for them overall. So definitely not a masterclass for RB. The disaster class of the weekend, I had McLaren. I doubled down on them and doubly lost. They don't seem to have the pace to be the second quickest at the moment, but they certainly aren't far off. At the moment, they seem to have their reliability concerns under control. And yeah, just none of that manifested throughout the race, which is good for them. They at least had a much stronger race this year compared to the last 2 years. That was one reason that I thought they would not do so well this weekend because of their struggles the past couple of years. Even though obviously the car is a lot more competitive this year than the past 2 years, I still thought they would struggle. It doesn't really suit their cars that well. And I believe it was Piastri who did mention that as well, that it doesn't particularly suit them. So I would imagine in the coming races with some of the tracks that fit their car a little better, that they're going to be right up there fighting for best of the rest. So that is the Bahrain Grand Prix done and dusted. First race of the season is already over, and already we move on to look ahead towards the Saudi Grand Prix. It is only 1 week away, another Saturday race, which is going to feel weird again. This time I should be able to watch it live, which is going to be exciting. And I'm ready to get the second race of the season underway. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Look out for my driver ratings coming out next, and then for my Saudi Grand Prix race reaction and review as well. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one.